Welcome. This is the Enlightenment Show, and I'm your host, Laurie Schoenfeld. This is where Chicken Soup for the Soul meets the artist way with Nancy Drew. Our guest today is Brooke Beyfuss, author of Before You Found Me. We're going to be chatting with her today all about her new release and something that she's done to protect someone she loves. Hello, Miss Brooke. Welcome to the Enlightenment Show.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurie. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so excited to have you joining us once again for your second book, Before You Found Me. What is something you've done this summer that has brought you joy?
Something I've done this summer that brought me joy. Well, the release of this book has brought me tremendous joy, but moving aside of that, it's been just having the opportunity. This is my last summer with my daughter before she goes to college. So just having the opportunity to be around her and do things with her and go places with her has been wonderful. So I've been trying to take advantage of that. She has a lot of friends, so she's out and about a lot, but we do spend a very good amount of time together because she's looking to go up north for college. So I'm trying to soak it all in, but it's been wonderful.
Oh, Mama, I am wrapping you in a giant hug because my daughter, so I have this summer and next summer will be my last one. So definitely It changes perspectives.
Yes, absolutely.
Can you share with our listeners and viewers what Before You Found Me is all about?
Sure. So Before You Found Me is kind of a complex a juggernaut of just different genres and different things. So it's a coming of age book. It's a partial domestic thriller. There's a lot about found family healing. But the crux of the story is surrounding a young woman named Rowan. She's 22 years old. She's just escaped from a near-death experience with an abusive fiance. And to try and kind of heal herself physically and mentally, she goes to house sit for her best friend who lives in Massachusetts. So while she's up there, she's having a lot of residual trauma. Her ex-fiance is still reaching out to her, and she's just looking for a distraction. And what she finds by way of a distraction is that there's a little boy who lives next door to her, and she just starts talking with him and decides, he's going to be her little friend. And, but the problem with him is that he only speaks to her through his basement window. It's not long before she finds out that he's being kept there and that his father is abusing him much the same way she was being abused. So she decides that when she leaves to go to her next destination, she's just going to take him with her. And she essentially peacefully abducts him, and she raises him as her own. And so the story just follows them for 8 years through their journey and through their own triumphs and errors, which they have a lot of both, dealing with both of their trauma. And, it's just, I find it a very healing, happy ever after story for them. So, it was quite a journey. It's a very long span.
Mm-hmm. And you began this concept, started it actually at age 14, but have been writing this book from 2010. Can you talk to us about that?
Okay. So when I was 14, so I'm a big insomniac. I've always been. When I was 14, I was starting having bad insomnia, and I would just try and think of things in my head and just make up little stories. And one image I kept getting over and over, and I didn't understand it. I just kept getting an image of two people running from a tornado in a field. That was just burned into my brain. I love weather. I'm a big weather nut. So I didn't think it was that weird, but people intrigued me. I'm like, who are these people? Why are they out there? What's going on? So I just started to kind of take notes and jot things down. And, if ever a new piece of the story came to me, I would just jot it down. And it wasn't whole to me, though. But as I got older, I learned more and more about them. And then I got to a point where I was so intimately involved with these characters and their lives, I was afraid to share them. I felt it felt so personal to me to put them down on paper and show them to other people. And so it was just very liberating when I was back in 2010. Yeah. I did a New Year's resolution. I said, I'm going to write this book. I'm going to get it out. And I ended up writing it in 9 months, which was amazing considering its length initially. And then I edited it for 3 years. So it was the fact that it got published at all, because I got my agent with it. And my agent adored it. She loved the story. She was very excited. And when we submitted it, it didn't sell. And I was just absolutely beside myself. So it took me a couple more tries. Finally, I sold after we were stolen. And when that happened, my wonderful publisher, Sourcebooks, and my editor, Erin, she said, do you have another book that we might be able to consider? And I said, I sure do. So I pitched her Before You Found Me, and she loved it. And she decided that was going to be the second book. So this is an old book. It's been around a long time in my head.
This is such a great conversation, Brooke, of domestic violence is an ongoing problem within our society, and it's really important to talk about.
Right.
What kind of research did you do to bring this conversation into your novel?
I did a lot of research I have a psychology degree, so a lot of the things I had thankfully learned and I knew about abusers' state of mind and the things they use to control their victims and how difficult it is to get away. And one of the most important things that I wanted to emulate is that it's the most difficult time for someone in an abusive relationship is when they do try to leave it. That is when they're the most vulnerable, the most danger. And Rowan, in a way, is fortunate that she is somewhat protected, but psychologically she's not. He's still able to reach her. He's still able to call her, and that does just as much damage to her. And then I also did a lot of research into, unfortunately, the many failings of the criminal justice system when it comes to abuse victims and how they're not believed much of the time, or their abuse is downplayed, and that can lead to just catastrophic consequences. So one of my writing group friends, who's been my group for about 5 years now, she is a former attorney, so I talked to her quite a bit. She helped me very much with the family law end of it, and just kind of gave me some ideas on what the logical steps would be, and for Rowan to find out that her abuser gets probation and gets 3 years plus probation, is not enough for her. And ultimately, though, the lawyer does blame it on her. He says, you didn't do enough. You didn't do enough to document. You didn't do it. And it was a terrible thing to have to write for her character, but it was very true.
Mm-hmm. I loved, Brooke, about this conversation is being a domestic violence situations, my life as well. It was very relatable of how you wrote, not only, especially with Gabe trying to get out of the situation and why it was hard for him to leave.
Yes.
That was very relatable, but also the behaviors and the patterns that continued for both Rowan and Gabe, even after they left the situation.
Absolutely. Rowan really tried. I think her intent was nothing but pure of heart, and she really wanted to move him past the abuse, but her method was suppression, which is not effective. It was, she tries to avoid re-traumatizing him by having him go through it again, or even dealing with it or thinking about it, and she doesn't let him feel it. And he kind of makes that decision on his own, which I thought was a very big, mature leap for his character, when he makes the decision on his own to face it himself and to not allow ghosts to follow him anymore. He's going to deal with them on his terms. But yeah, she kind of, like I said, they have their triumphs and their mistakes, and there's mistakes that are made, and in some ways they're able to break their cycles, and in some ways she does perpetuate it, unknowingly, of course. So, it was very interesting to see their dynamic. At times, I felt like Gabriel was more mature than Rowan in some instances.
There's a part in the book where Rowan actually makes that decision of, I don't want to tell Gabe about my own experience. And I sat with that and kind of held the book a little bit of like, I've personally felt that as well, as I'm sure many others have also, where we want so much to protect those around us, but they also need to know to an extent, and they need to feel it, like you just mentioned.
Absolutely. And yeah, that was for her, it was such a freeing moment to actually have him know. And he makes one thing he says to her, he says, "Why didn't you tell me? You know, I would have understood." And she said, "I didn't want you to understand." She didn't want to lay anything more on top of him, any more than what he was already carrying. But then he turned around and understands that he wasn't carrying his own burden. She was carrying it for him. So for him to realize just exactly how much she sacrificed and took on herself to help save him was a tremendous revelation. And that is my absolute favorite scene in the book, is when they have that conversation.
Why do you think it is important for people to connect that are going in similar situations, kind of like how Rowan and Gabe connected?
Yeah, I think it's important to, have someone there that you can fully be vulnerable with, because they do understand you in a way that maybe, or your situation in a way that other people may not. And it's a very cathartic kind of thing to be able to discuss it and to be able to talk about it, and also to not talk about it. If it's a situation where sometimes you just need someone there that's going to empathize with you and just sit quietly with you and not force the issue. That's just as important to me. I think that's something that everyone should have, is a kind of a sounding board, and to have someone that can relate to you on that level is just, to have someone that's a very powerful connection.
Mm-hmm. Did you have moments, Brooke, where emotionally you needed to pause as you were writing some of these scenes to kind of just step away and regroup?
Big time. There was a lot going on, and I was very no holds barred when it came to what was portrayed. And I tried not to be overly gratuitously graphic, but there were things that happened that needed to be seen in order to understand both of their full perspectives. But yeah, definitely, I did have to take. When I was editing it, the writing came pretty easy, but the editing, I think the editing is where the writing is for me personally. Yeah. That's where it happens. So for going through the editing, it was just very heavy, and I would get very kind of sad and low about not just their situation, but the fact that this is not something that's that far-fetched as far as just their individual abuse situations. It's not something that's not happening right now. And you hear stories of children who are found in houses in dog cages and, locked in bedrooms and shackled to beds. And it's not something that is, that far-fetched. So understanding that, because at 14, when I was coming up with these concepts, and I thought the idea that Gabriel may have been abused, it didn't hit me that hard. I was young myself. Yeah. And so I didn't really have enough experience with the world to understand that, what he experienced was not a story. It's the reality for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. How was writing this book a different experience from writing your first book, After We Were Stolen?
Oh my goodness. Night and day. After We Were Stolen came out like smooth as butter. I wrote it, and I think it's, I hate to say this because I still write like this, but I actually plotted After We Were Stolen. I plotted it, which I don't do. I never do that. But I did plot it out. And because it was taking place in such a tight time span, I said, I need to really kind of have my thoughts and organize my ducks in a row to get this on paper, because I'm a rambler. As far as writing, I'll go on forever. So, writing that book was just kind of, and I was much more experienced by that point. It was the fifth book I tried to write, so I had a lot more experience. So going back to this one was great, because in a way I could see the mistakes I had made as a younger writer and as a newer writer, and I could adjust them and I could fix them, and it was a lot easier to go through the editing process. But this one really did. The character sat inside my heart. I was so very devoted to telling their story as accurately and as effectively as I could. And it was a very personal experience.
Mm-hmm. What would you tell writers that are wanting to publish a book, but they're in the nick of, I have this concept, I have this idea, I've written it down, but are kind of in the murky middle part?
Yeah. It's a big, and you know what? I was there for a long time myself. So I learned of a concept in writing, fear of flying, which is when you do have these great ideas and you do have the motivation to put them on paper, but you don't have enough oomph or enough confidence to push past to get to that next level. And once I actually did it, it was the best feeling in the world. I was like, I said, I spent a whole year when I was writing Before You Found Me. I would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I would write until I had to go to work at 9 o'clock. And then I would stay up until 2 or 3 in the morning and I'd edit all day at my job. And I was like on a high all the time. I felt wonderful. And it was just one of the greatest years of my life, just writing that book, that initial first draft. It was very empowering and it felt wonderful. So if you want a really good payoff, go ahead and put everything down on paper and put it out there, because you will feel that excitement.
Mm-hmm. When you held your book, Brooke, for the first time, what was one of the first positive affirmations that you kind of said to yourself internally while you were holding your book?
I just kept saying, like, I cannot believe that I did this. I just cannot believe I did this. It was just stunning, just after such a long time. And not only not having been published for such a long time, but the fact that I didn't think it was ever going to be published. Like, it was a closed door. And I never thought for a minute, oh my gosh, like maybe I'll get a second chance to get this book. I never thought that. And then it happened. So I always tell people in my writing group who are querying or who are, pre-publication, I said, this is the exciting time, because this is when anything can happen. It doesn't have to be scary to query. It doesn't have to be scary to search for publishers. This is exciting. It's like you're on that precipice where anything can happen. And for me to have my very first novel that I wrote way back when, actually come to light this many years later, I just think it's really a cool thing. And I hope that it's an inspiring thing for other people.
Mm-hmm. Let's take it to the question that we posed at the very beginning, Brooke.
Oh, okay.
What's something that you've done to protect a loved one?
So again, I have to go back to my daughter for this one, because when she was, I'd say about 6 years old, she started developing really debilitating migraines as a very young child. And so we had to do a lot of doctor's appointments. We had a lot of neurology appointments. She was on medication for them. And it was just something that escalated and it kept getting worse. When she was 10, she was diagnosed with epilepsy, which was, I think, the headaches were maybe a precursor to that, because the epilepsy came and it came hard. So she has tonic-clonic seizures, and they're very, very violent. So all of a sudden I had to be really different in the way I parented her. And I never wanted to be overprotective, but now I kind of had to. I kind of had to say, okay, like these are the perimeters we're working with now. This is where it's going to be different. And, so I really had to kind of protect her from, I'm not going to say herself, but just from being, reckless about her condition, and making sure that she really understood it, and that she would understand to take her medication every day. And even now she's 18 and I still get nervous about, her doing something that might aggravate it. The first summer she was diagnosed, we did a complete cleanse of her diet, and we cut out anything that we thought might be a trigger. And eventually we learned together, we found out what her triggers were. My husband and I were able to kind of get through it together, but it was very protective, probably for her a miserable time, because we were very, very protective of her. But it was just that not understanding this disease and coming to terms with the fact that she's going to have it for her whole life. So I think that was my biggest bubble that I ever put anybody in.
Mm-hmm. And those triggers, Brooke, I can only imagine, it takes time to figure out, like, a lot of different trial and error and time to figure out what those even looks like.
Yeah. And once you know them, it's even more frightening when they show up. Because for my daughter, for Tess, one of her biggest triggers is illness. If she gets run down, if she gets a cold, if she gets, a fever, she's likely to have a seizure. So now we had to work with the doctors to really work on her medication, because now she's driving. So we had to work on her medication very, very carefully over almost a year, to make sure she was at a point where she was seizure free. She was safe to drive, and even the triggers weren't causing seizures anymore. But it took, like you said, a lot of trial and error. It was a long road.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I'm sending you lots of love from my corner to yours, just coming from a mama, but also like, wanting that independence of they need to figure it out on their own. But also, of course, you have that fear and that trauma as a mom too, of make sure my baby's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are multiple milestones within writing, first drafts, going through editing, querying.
Mhm.
What are different ways that you do recharge after those milestones to refill your creative well?
I tend to step completely away. Especially when I'm writing, and I'm actually having this problem with my current work in progress, because it's inches from being done, and it's that last inch that's holding me back, and I can't seem to jump over it. But yeah, I think that it's very important to take time for yourself to recharge. It's important to not force yourself to continue when you know in your heart and in your head that you need a rest. And again, with querying, I used to do batches, and I would say, okay, I'm going to send out this batch, and then I would wait a while. And while I waited, I'd say, okay, I'm going to take a week of just absorption, and then I'm going to take a week and look at my query letter. What can I fix? What can I make better? What wasn't popping? What can pop? And then just start all over again. So, it was just kind of a cycle. It was kind of like a rest, recharge, restart cycle. And I still believe that now. I still believe that it's very important to step completely away, and your eyes will be so much fresher when you do. It's incredible how much different things look, and it's, once you've had the time to kind of decompress.
Mm-hmm. I love that, because so often, we get into that, just as humans, that feeling we need to keep going and going, and we push and push and push and forget that pause is actually that thing that gives us what we're searching for if we just step back a little bit.
Yeah, it's like sleep every night. You need to sleep every night. And for such a big process as to, completing a book and then taking it to the next level, I mean, you need that. And a lot of times people say, like, they go to sleep with a problem and they wake up with a solution. And it's the same idea. You kind of step away, you don't think about it, and it's amazing what's going on behind the scenes in your mind.
Mm-hmm. We're going to take it to the inner child question segment. All right, Brooke. First question: when you were 11, what was something that made you feel safe?
I was 11. Okay, so when I was 11, I used to have in my bedroom, I had kind of like a chair in the corner, and it was like a chair like this. And the way it was angled was that there was a little nook in the back of it. And that was like my little space. So I would go over every time I was stressed, or if I was, upset or whatever, I would go into my little nook, and I would always bring a container of chocolate almond ice cream with me and a book. And I would just sit back there and just kind of chill. And that was my place to kind of, get myself back to where I needed to be. And I wish I still had a little nook like that now, because it was a great place to sit and decompress.
Do you still do the chocolate almond in a book sometimes?
Now I'm pretty much straight chocolate. The almonds I'll do separately. I'll eat almonds on their own, but ice cream now I'm pretty much, I just want the chocolate.
Just the rich chocolate.
The chocolate, that's all.
What was something that you loved as a teenager that you would like to bring back?
I loved as a teenager. I loved nights out with my friends as a teenager, the way we used to do them back then. So I grew up in the 90s. I was a 90s teenager, and I think I turned I turned 13. I think I turned 13 in 1993. So it was just, I remember it was a very different time then. And I try and explain this to my own daughter. I'm like, it was a different time. It wasn't like now. But we used to have such adventures and just go out. And I mean, I'm still friends with so many of the people that I can say that I had these adventures with, but it's something that you kind of outgrow, but I miss it. I do miss kind of those like late night drives, and, there's no cell phones. Nobody can get in touch with you. We used to love, one of the things that we loved to do, it was a weird thing, but I guess it's a thing teenagers do, is we used to go and hang out in cemeteries and just walk around, and we would look at different gravestones and interesting ones. And, it was just something that we did to pass the time. But, now everything is just a much different ball of wax. So I do wish I could have another outing like we used to have back when I was a teenager.
You have to put that on your bucket list, Brooke, of sometime this year, reconnect.
I'm putting all my friends together. I'm like, listen, we're going to the graveyard.
That's it. Just make a whole night out of it. Yeah. Insomniacs. Why does creativity bring you joy?
And for me, creativity, the sharing of it brings me joy. Just being able to, for my own personal use, I love being able to sit down and tell myself stories all day. And I love to be able to, never be bored really in my own head, because there's always characters rattling around. There's always something going on. But for me to be able to write it down and share it with someone and have them experience it and have them find joy in it as well is just phenomenal to me. I just love that. And I get so excited when I see people that tag me in reviews. I love the book. I love the book. And it makes me so happy that they did. I'm just like, oh, thank God. Like somebody saw they picked up what I was laying down. And, it's just such a nice experience, a nice feeling to know that you're sharing a little bit of your own inner joy with other people.
Absolutely agree with you, Brooke. We have a comment coming in for you.
Oh,
Miss Amanda, kudos bars.
So Amanda's my sister, and she's right. Kudos bars. I don't know if you remember kudos bars. Big hit in my teenage years. Big hit. that was one of my definite favorite things to have. Yes, she's not wrong.
So it was. Are we talking about like I gotta visually see this. Yeah. They were like the chocolate bars, right?
Yeah, they were covered in chocolate. They had like M&Ms in them and Snickers. My best friend, who I'm still best friends with 40 years later, his mom always stocked the kitchen with kudos bars. So going to his house was wonderful. And when I went to college, his mom used to send me care packages of kudos bars. So they don't make them anymore. Terrible.
They do not, but they are like the ultimate, like in my brain, I'm like, it's a snack, but it could be kind of like a small meal. Like you feel like it's enough, but then you got sugar.
Yeah. And you had, it was like granola, which is good. And then you had your candy to go with it.
Yes. I understand you, Brooke. I'm right. With book clubs that you've been doing, what is something that you've really enjoyed talking about within your book clubs?
I really like when people ask questions about kind of behind the scenes. If they ask like, what's something that was unusual that happened when you were writing this book? What's a coincidence that was really cool that you found out? And I have a really good example of one, and this one freaked me out. It was so in the very beginning of the book, Gabriel's reading his mother's favorite book, which is Tender is the Night. And I picked that very arbitrarily. I didn't really think about it too much. I just wanted something that wasn't something that not everybody had heard of, but it was still pretty popular. So I just kind of went with it. I just kind of pulled it out and I said, okay, this will be it. But I didn't know anything about the story. And eventually, after a few drafts, I'm like, I should really figure out what this book is even about, just so I know that what he's kind of absorbing. And I found out when I looked it up that the original title for Tender is the Night is The Boy Who Killed His Mother.
Oh,
blew my mind.
I just got chills.
Blew my mind. Because that's the whole reason Gabriel's in the basement. His father blames him for an accident that he and his mother were in, and the fact that she died and he didn't. So that was the refrain he heard all the time was, you killed your mother, you killed your mother. And he believes it because he was too young to really fight against the idea. But when I read that, I almost passed out. I said it was like, wow, it was crazy.
Yes. And I love too, I want to mention, because you brought that up, with the internal dialogue of that he didn't kill his mother, but because he's heard that so much and it's ingrained in his brain, that becomes his identity and why he behaves in so many different ways that he does.
Yeah. Yeah. I thought that was a very, he became much more cautious moving forward, and he wasn't so much of a rebellious child. He was more subdued, and I felt like he was almost afraid to take steps, almost afraid to do new things because of what had happened in his past. So a big part of his character was moving him past that fear and understanding that he's not going to have a negative effect on the world if he goes into it.
Yes. And we both are psychology lovers. I know that you also were into psychology. What is the thing that you found most fascinating, or you still find most fascinating, about the psychology behind people and humans?
Oh my goodness. It's how much of our behavior is just not, you're so unaware of so many of the reasons you behave the way you do. And unfortunately, in researching the trauma that the characters went through, you know, a lot of that came to light. And I was thinking about, okay, I said, I have 2 traumatized characters and here's how they're behaving. But then I realized I had 3, because Gabriel's father was also a traumatized character. And he reacted in a very negative way, while Rowan and Gabriel took it into a more positive direction. And I thought that was fascinating. I just thought, like, that didn't occur to me while I was writing it. But I thought, you know what? He also suffered of severe trauma, which changed him. And it changed him for the worst, unfortunately. But I just think it's fascinating how, you know, people are unconscious of so much of our behavior, and how much, you know, we internalize things and then they come out in different ways later. So I always try to, with luck, internalize things and make them come out better. But I'm a very bad overthinker, and I'm also very hard on myself. I'm my own worst critic. My husband tells me that all the time. He says, I've never met anyone who's harder on you than you are. But, you know, it's just, I just think it's fascinating the way people react and behave toward, you know, outside events and stimulus that shape them.
Mm-hmm. So the overthinking for you blend into your insomnia?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can lay away and I can pick one tiny little thing and think about it all night.
Yeah. So see, stories and creativity at least helps us to process.
Yes.
Put it somewhere, you know. Before we end today, Brooke, where can our listeners and viewers find you if they have any questions about your new book or any other questions for you after the show?
Yes, so I am available on my website, which is brookebeyfuss.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook as @Brooke Beyfuss, and my name is so weird, nobody else has it, so if you find it, it'll definitely be me. So yeah, definitely they can reach out to me. There's a submission form on my website for questions. I do book club discussions. I do Zoom. I'll go in person if it's close enough. So yeah, I'd love to hear from people. I always, every time I get a message, I'm like, oh boy. So by all means, reach out.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for joining us to talk about Before You Found Me. It's been such a pleasure to chat.
Thank you so much, Lori.
And thank you all who have joined us live and will join us on the replay. Remember, as you go about the rest of your week, to find the things that are working within your life. You are the creator of your own story. What steps will you take next? Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you. Bye-bye.